Something huge is brewing for the Toronto Maple Leafs as reports and rumors continue to swirl surrounding the Leafs' next move on Brad Treliving, and a brand new report has dropped revealing some very interesting information surrounding one particular player. We're going to break down these reports, discuss what they mean going forward, as well as a few other Leafs updates on this episode today, folks. But before we get into it all, if you're a part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, you guys have been an absolute beast with the support, so make sure to hit that subscribe button, and thank you guys again for your continued support. There's a ton to go over today, and there is a lot of news that is flying. Now, of course, the Leafs are at an interesting point. They still need a top six forward, and reports are going to continue to swirl, obviously, until Brad Treliving makes the next move, which is inevitably going to happen here. But a brand new report has dropped revealing one particular player that is very interesting, I think, is the best word to say it here. And a new article has dropped. Trade brewing, Maple Leafs and Islanders emerging as perfect partners. And this isn't just from this article. We've heard in the past, there's been a lot of rumblings about not necessarily this player, but players of this nature surrounding the Leafs, especially this offseason. And let's dive right into it. So a new article by Bleacher Report has linked the Leafs to Islanders captain Anders Lee. And there has been some rumblings in the past about this. The article basically goes on to say that since trading Mitch Marner to the Vegas Golden Knights, the Toronto Maple Leafs have been interested in a top six winger, as we know. And we also know, of course, they got Michelli, they got Matthew Nyes re-signed. But Anders Lee, he is in the final year of an 8-year deal with a cap hit of $7 million. He is 35 years old. So none of these things I'm saying right now sound too promising. However, he's a veteran that could help this team given, the right scenario and the right trade here. But again, there's a few caveats here. But I'm still starting to think now, as you start to go through the players that become available, if Brad Treliving can't find a young, controllable top six wing or someone like that, they could pivot to a more veteran type of player like Anders Lee or like a Nazem Kadri. And he's still a very, very solid player.
Yeah, this doesn't necessarily fit the mold of what we know Brad Treliving wants, but at the end of the day, we do know that Brad Treliving has come out and said that they want to add on the wing in the top six, so we got to talk about it. We got to talk about any option that the Leafs may have available to them this offseason, and this is one of them. Now, if you look at it, this is a guy, before we get into the age and all of that stuff, this is a guy who can play in your top six, is a left-handed shot. He has pretty equal production in terms of assists and goals, but he's more of a goal scorer. He scored 29 goals last year on an Islanders team that, of course, isn't that great, didn't have too much help, and obviously, Barzal missed some time. So if you want to look into that, you can if you want to, but he can score some goals. So it's an interesting option in that way. Where you lose me with this player is the fact that he is 35. He's, his contract expires at the end of this year, so you're taking on a UFA in that case without an extension. And even if you want to extend this player, obviously it's going to be less than $7 million because of his age, and his production has dipped a little bit over the years. That is concerning to me. Even if you want to extend this player, he's 35 years old. How long are you going to extend him for, right? So, and he's definitely not Brad Marchand, and I don't think you're getting him for any of the intangible stuff in terms of playoff success, right? That's certainly not why you would acquire an Anders Lee. But if you take a look at some of the projections, he's projected at like a 2 to 3 year contract, and still the cap hit is not ideal. And does he even play in your top six past this year? He's older than John Tavares, right? Let's keep that in mind. So I don't like this option for that reason. But, if it was a perfect world where it's like he's only going to make $3 million after this year, maybe you keep him around. He can be a depth option because we don't know what's happening with Max Pacioretty, let's say, heading into the future. And even this year, he's not signed. The plan is, I guess, to sign him from everything we've heard, but hasn't happened yet. But I think it's an interesting option. He can score some goals, but, hovering in the 55 to 60 point range for a top six winger doesn't really excite me. He's older, makes a ton of money this year too. Didn't even touch on that yet. You would have to retain salary if you're the Islanders, and then you're probably going to have to give up more if you're the Leafs. So don't think this one makes too much sense, but listen, we got to talk about all the options because the Maple Leafs need somebody to play in their top six.
Yeah, obviously making $7 million. The good news is you can also see, and obviously you mentioned a negative being that he's an expiring contract. That could be a good thing as well for the Leafs. You're obviously not stuck on. There's some players out there 37, 38 years old under contract for many years. For Anders Lee, it would just be, like you mentioned, an expiring deal. Now, would he cost a lot? That's ultimately the question here. If you can get him for fairly cheap, which I don't know if that would happen because he is the captain of the Islanders, but if you can get him for fairly cheap, then maybe it makes some sense. And obviously, I wouldn't mind a 2-year deal. Like if he continues his production, you can see they're up top, 54 points in 82 games last year. I think he's good enough to play in the top six, especially for this Leafs team. He's actually a very good goal scorer, which is something the Leafs also need as well. Of course, a playmaking wing, but I think it makes sense only if you get him for fairly cheap. And then, what is that? Well, like, how cheap would the Islanders want a guy like Nick Robertson? Of course, they probably would need some retained salary. The Leafs have some other guys they could trade. Obviously, David Camp, players like that have some salary. It would obviously take a perfect world here. But you can see here, if Lee doesn't fit and the team waves the white flag when it comes to that, Toronto needs to act. And of course, they basically say they don't have a ton of assets. They do have some interesting picks. They have some things to do there. Also, Bobby McMahon is an interesting name throwing out. I actually like that idea a lot because if you're the Islanders, you can see the upside with Bobby McMahon. Like, he's had very good years. And if you want to maybe take a flyer, and of course, you'd have to give up other things, I think the Leafs have some intriguing assets for a team like the Islanders. But again, it would have to be a perfect world here. And if he played well, I wouldn't mind a 2-year contract because that's kind of the current window the Leafs are in anyways. But then you're extending a 35 to 36-year-old for 2 years. Can you expect good production? There would be a lot of ifs here, but it's another name that has kind of taken over the news cycle a little bit here is Anders Lee, and it makes sense because the Leafs, it's clear what their need is, and everybody knows what their need is. It's just a matter of will they be able to actually fill that need with who they want, and if not, you might have to look at players like Anders Lee, where hopefully you don't have to overpay for them, but you get somebody in the top 6. Because I'm pretty convinced that Brad Treliving is going to make a trade for this top 6, even if it's not his 1A option.
Yeah, he has to. There's too many guys that play on this team in the bottom 6 right now. If you look at the depth chart, like, they got to move off some players, even if they didn't want the salary cap space. You got to move off some players. The guys are going to be sitting for no reason. So they're going to continue to free up salary cap space. They need a top 6 player. Is it Anders Lee? We were talking about him last summer, right? And he had 2 years left on his deal. So that was something that we were even talking about last summer, retained salary, all of those things. The reason I think, as an aside to Bobby McMahon's name keeps being brought up over the last couple of weeks, I guess at this point, I've said it before in videos, not very consistent, didn't do much in the playoffs. So I feel like, the team might view him as expendable at this point. He's going to be 30 years old. Ultimately, I think that you still give him an opportunity, right? Because he's still actually only getting used to the league at this point, even though he is 30. He was, in the AHL for a long time, has shown some, upside, that's for sure. But I feel like that's a reason why he's being thrown around, and he's could be viewed as a valuable asset from other teams, right? And if you look at the Islanders, they're moving into a new era as well. They probably want to shed some of their older players. They already did that with Brock Nelson. They're ushering in a new era of younger players, and their first round this year was absolutely insane in the draft, that is. So I could see this making sense for them and them taking on, some prospects, or maybe not prospects, but useful pieces from the Leafs. But I don't, ultimately, if you were to make this trade, I don't think it happens, but ultimately, if you were to make it, I don't think you have to give up the whole farm or anything like that for Anders Lee, which I think could make some sense. But at the end of the day, I think you need somebody who makes a real impact. You don't need like a Mitch Marner replacement. We've been talking about that, but you need somebody who can play in the top 6, who isn't going to be retiring within the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's obviously what makes this semi-realistic and a little bit realistic, is the fact that if the Islanders want to shed this salary, there's not a ton of teams, I don't think, out there that would necessarily want to take on that $7 million, even if it's a little bit retained. And the Leafs are in a perfect spot to where they can take on they have open roster spots for one. And of course, anyone can make room for a guy like Anders Lee, but for the Leafs, could make a little bit of sense there, especially given the fact that he'd be a pretty good left-handed shot goal scorer for this team. But that'll wrap it up. Let us know down below what your thoughts are. So far, Brad Treliving has done a good job with replacing Mitch Marner with a few different players. Maybe they'll be on the horizon. Another move will be on the horizon soon, and we'll keep you up to date every step of the way. Let us know down below, would you do an Anders Lee trade surrounding a guy like Bobby McMahon and a draft pick? Of course, you'd have to make salary work. Let us know down below what your thoughts are. We'll see you later.